Hi, I am Daniela, and today I will be sharing with you the history of birth and midwifery in North America, a very condensed version of it. And afterwards, I will share with you my visions and prayers for birth and midwifery future. So, Native American communities throughout North America had midwives. This included parteras and comadronas from Mexico. Colonial settlers began arriving in North America in 1607, and shortly after, they started bringing female midwife settlers. They brought African slaves, which included traditional midwives, and eventually many immigrant midwives from various countries arrived in the colonies and eventually states. Midwives were valued for their services. Sometimes they were even given land and homes in exchange for their service to the community. Traditional African midwives during slavery brought in more income for their owners as they served birth for other families. So they were more valued for their skills in that regard. At some point, birth was a social event where neighbors, sisters, friends, and family came to support the birthing mother and nurture her postpartum. The Industrial Revolution greatly disrupted this village based support as families dispersed and priorities shifted. Men made their way into birth as the medical field began to grow. Sometimes they'd be called upon for challenging births, where they might bleed a woman to treat a vast array of ailments or use barbaric instruments to extract the fetus. Their arrival into the birth scene was largely experimental, and it continued to be experimental for a long time. At times, it still is experimental to this day. The men midwives attended births at home until gradually facilitating the transition into the hospital. That was made possible by many overlapping factors, such as twilight sleep, which was perceived to grant women pain free childbirth. The administration of twilight sleep drugs and monitoring had to be under the careful management of a large team at a hospital with the large amount of special equipment it required. Thus, the perspective was perpetuated. Birth needs to be in the hospital in order to be best managed by the experts. This thus also facilitated the shift of authority in birth from the birthing woman to some perceived expert outside of herself. After about 60 years of using twilight sleep, it was unveiled as not fully numbing the pains of labor, but causing an amnesic effect, making women forget it all, even though they, by and large, were still feeling the pains of labor. Its use gradually dwindled into eventual extinction. Birth gradually shifted from the social event of woman caring for woman as a strong community to woman birthing alone in institutions with strangers. This was the shift from women holding the power, wisdom, and authority over birth to men holding the authority and being framed as the experts on birthing matters. Other factors that brought birth into the hospital and into the hands of doctors was the tremendous amount of anti-midwife propaganda they put out, defaming midwives for being illiterate and dirty. Obstetricians, as they eventually called themselves to differentiate themselves from the common midwife, worked very hard to position themselves as essential specialists in contrast to willy-nilly uneducated lay midwives. They thus had to frame birth as highly dangerous and complicated, requiring the deep thinking skills of rational-minded men and their expertise, and thus no place for a hysterical woman midwife at the mercy of her hormones. Many pushed for the abolition of midwives. The medical field gradually gained more power in the USA, establishing regulations, licensure, national organizations, etc. And they began policing midwives who didn't create national organizations to stand up for themselves and their communities. There's many reasons the voices of midwifery were stomped out. A huge part of it was racial, ethnic, and gender-based discrimination that prevented them from going to medical school, learning to read and write, etc. And with so many midwives from different backgrounds, they all spoke different languages and came from different cultures, all posing barriers in their ability to communicate and unite. Midwifery started being more and more strictly regulated by outsiders until it was eventually criminalized in many states. Birth became medicalized and viewed as a dangerous pathology that must be managed, and women must be saved from it. After the hospitals ended up with the majority of the births in the country, women started questioning and disagreeing with the hospital based birthing. Women started attending each other's births again after becoming disillusioned with hospitals. Midwifery was established in 1920, and certified professional midwifery was established in the early 1990s. Still, only 1 to 2% of births occur in the home with a midwife at this time. So that's kind of where we're at and sort of how we got there. Here's my visions and my prayers for the future. Regarding midwifery in specific, I think it would be wonderful for midwifery to start thinking beyond that we are there just in case. Yes, that's a part of it, but let's go beyond that and embrace that we are there as wise, loving, spiritual guides, holding space for someone to navigate a deep, transformative ceremony, and for women to see it as a deep spiritual rite of passage as well. Midwifery, for it to experience an expansion of sisterhood and camaraderie amongst various types of midwives and birth workers, where we celebrate our diversity and grow stronger, wiser, and more unified because of it. I would love to see midwifery less interested in conforming and compromising in order to be accepted by degrading, oppressive systems, and more interested in standing for women's autonomy and diversity of options, and for more and more women to be called to serve in the authentic, wise woman model of midwifery. Now, in regards to birth more specifically, my prayers are for women to trust that birthing is just as part of their innate abilities as is breathing, blinking, eating, digesting, voiding, and bowel movements. A return to embodying health, more movement, dance, mindful breathing and moving, walking, swimming, mountain explorations, etc. The point is more embodying of the connection of spirit, mind, and body. I envision a major shift where the majority of births worldwide occur at home. This isn't about birth just happening at home, but this statement is actually calling upon the majority of people to do the internal work, decolonize their minds, and claim their power, which you can do all that and still birth in the hospital, but the process makes you realize the hospital is not needed as often as most might assume it to be. Now, for the collective at large, so this is for providers just as much as it is for women who are actually birthing. We need a total shattering of the hierarchy of knowledge between experts and women birthing that positions women as clueless and thus not capable of knowing what's best for them. We need a mental shift from we must save women to supporting women in saving themselves. We need a collective understanding that you can't think the baby out any more than you can think your way to an orgasm. You've got to surrender and feel your way through it. So more getting out of your head, stopping the overthinking cycle, and connecting more with the ability to feel your way through things and flow with your intuition, right? Here's that embodying piece. A reframing of the sensations of labor as a divine rite of passage, sensations to befriend, a willingness to feel them instead of running from them as the depths they take us to. Trusting they have a higher purpose and thus we benefit from feeling them instead of routinely numbing them. We need practitioners to stop positioning themselves as the protagonists of other people's births and stop making themselves the all-knowing end-all be-all authority, and for women to stop looking at practitioners as the authorities over their health and birth and life. We need everyone to recognize that by and large, birth usually just works. We need the centering of women as their own primary care providers and decision makers, for providers to practice this and women to embody this. We need the valuing of women's intuition as a source of authoritative knowledge. More women ready to become their own authority, be clear and strong in their own convictions, who are not easily manipulated, coerced, or fear-mongered. more women ready to break free from the people-pleasing good girl mold that has only proven to hold us all back. More women being way more interested in boldly standing in their own truth than interested in compromising for fear of otherwise rocking the boat. We need more women willing to rock the boat. We need more women not afraid to be disruptors and ruffle some feathers. More women not letting fear rule their lives. We need more women looking less outside of themselves for answers and more digging deep within themselves. A collective understanding that life is inherently risky and birth is no more dangerous or risky than life itself in general. To breathe is to risk it all. My last deep prayer is that we bring more love, compassion, joy, patience, wisdom, calmness, sweetness, tenderness, depth, respect, rawness, wilderness, sweetness, wildness, triumph, empowerment, spiritual connection, ritual, understanding, ceremony, and again, love, 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 so much more love into birth. That caps it all. That is straight from the heart, passionately, from my very fired up soul, and with so much aloha.